want to give you some of the results. Between Trevor Lawrence and Antonio Alfano, the crowd has picked Trevor Lawrence, so they agree with you there. Between Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, it was 50-50, so that was definitely a hard decision for me, but I went ahead and picked Arch Manning there. And then between Bryce Underwood and Jeremiah Smith, Bryce Underwood got the nod, barely 57% to 42%. But alas, I picked Jeremiah Smith, so come at me. And then finally, Bryce Young versus Travis Hunter. 60% of the votes went to Bryce Young. So let's go ahead and move on to our final four. We have Trevor Lawrence going up against Arch Manning. Coop, who wins this?
I got Trevor Lawrence really kind of running away with this. And I don't want to go back to Greg's point just about Arch and Arch playing two-way football. And you talk about elevating the guys around you. And I think Arch Manning did that. But when you talk about a guy in Trevor Lawrence who became a starter his freshman year at Cartersville playing a high level of comp, and then you look at the record, 52-2. I mean, this guy had a 41-game win streak. I mentioned that earlier. But talk about the level of competitor his freshman year at Clemson, carrying that over as well. So I like this one. Out and away here with Trevor Lawrence over Arch Manning.
I went with Trevor Lawrence as well. Again, don't want to repeat myself from what I said earlier. Just coming out of high school, what did Trevor Lawrence do wrong, right? What was the weakness in his game? And I couldn't find one. I actually like Arch better now than I did coming out of high school. To me, it showed Arch. A lot of guys would have transferred if they were Arch by now, right? I love the fact that he wanted to stay and play under Sark. And even if it take two, day and age now, right now, it's different with the portal, the way it is, where kids, if you're not starting by your true freshman year, I'm out of here. And Arch, for me, it showed me a lot by staying there. I think he's going to have a great junior year. He's going to be a first-round pick, maybe first overall pick. But again, Trevor Lawrence, one of the most unique high school players I've ever seen. And I got to go with Trevor.
All right, Trevor Lawrence. Moving on to the national championship. Who will he face between Jeremiah Smith and Bryce Young? Greg Biggins, would you like to kick us off there?
I'm going to go with Bryce. Again, I talked about Jeremiah being the Andre Johnson of our generation, but again, I'm going to go positional value. I know I may have contradicted myself a little bit because I went with Jeremiah a little earlier over Bryce Underwood, but I got to go with Bryce Young. Special talent, special kid. Again, just wired the right way. And one of those guys, Coop mentioned modern day and playing on that big stage. For me, watching Bryce the way, I did, I was just as impressed with him when he played at LA Cathedral High School, which is a smaller school, where I jokingly said he would get the snap and have 18 guys in his face. And he'd have to make guys miss and make all these crazy football plays that most normal kids could not do. So people say, modern day, he had a ton of talent. I saw him without that talent, and he was the guy for me. He was the number one quarterback for me before he got to modern day and he committed to USC before his junior season. So Bryce Young, love them both, but Bryce Young for me, best quarterback I've seen.
I agree with Biggie here. The other thing on Bryce Young, like one of the most complete, casual, graceful playmakers from the pocket that I've ever seen. And I think, when the Steph Curry thing comes up, it sounds a little bit silly, but when you watch both of them play, they look almost nonchalant in their ability to kind of control and dominate a game. And that's really what you see Bryce Young, his ability to pocket navigate, move his eyes, create passing lanes down the field as well. His ability to do that day in and day out, week to week, against playing some of the best competition in California is why I've been riding with Bryce Young, especially kind of in that first-round matchup. But I love Bryce Young. Like I said, it's a little bit more of a intimate knowledge of scouting this guy is one of the most favorite things I got to do.
I love it. And I especially appreciate that you guys are agreeing here so I don't have to make a tough decision. So make it easy for me here with the national championship, why don't you? We have Trevor Lawrence versus Bryce Young to determine who is the number one prospect over the last 8 years. Biggins, I'll go to you first on this. Who wins it all?
It was tough, Emily and Coop. It was painful, but I had to eliminate my SoCal bias. And I went with Trevor Lawrence. Again, I think, Coop said it very, may have been off camera, but they're very similar in a lot of ways, except one guy is 6'4" and one guy is 5'11". And talk about playmaking, at the high school level coming out. And, even though I was all about Bryce being the number one quarterback, number one player overall in our class, in the back of my head, I still kind of wondered, man, but he's 5'11". And it wasn't a stocky, Kyler Murray 5'11". It was a, 170-pound 5'11". And so I always wondered, man, can this guy physically hold up? He's going to get pounded in the SEC, NFL. Whereas Trevor Lawrence, again, I love the same things I liked about Bryce Young with Trevor Lawrence. Maybe not the innate feel that Bryce had for the position in terms of just the pocket, when to escape, when to stay in there, when to climb it, throwing with anticipation. Bryce, best I've ever seen with that. But Trevor does everything well the way Bryce does. But talk about a 6'4", 6'5" guy who can absolutely run. So if it's big guy, small guy, both elite, I went with the Trevor Lawrence, and tough call, but I Trevor Lawrence was my guy.
Greg, I'm going to go with the SoCal bias. I'm going to go with Bryce Young. Everything you just said, you just made the argument for me. The biggest thing about it is that's what makes it kind of even more insane and even more special watching Bryce Young do the things that he has done throughout his high school career, throughout his collegiate career, and now hopefully getting back on track with David Canales in Carolina. But you think about this guy, all the obstacles, at least from a size standpoint, for him to even be the number one ranked quarterback. And I know that sounds crazy, especially because a lot of the people here, we work at the company that made those decisions. We know the philosophy. We know the philosophy, scouting philosophy of all NFL evaluators. That's what they want. They want a Trevor Lawrence. They want a 6'4", 6'5" guy. They want a DJ Uiagalelei who's got the big hands and the big frame at 230 pounds that can throw the ball 65 yards in the field. What about a guy like Bryce Young that does everything well and 5'10"? You said it. It's not like this stocky frame like Kyler Murray, who's also a first-round draft pick in the MLB. It's not who he is. This is a guy that's slender, 175, 180 pounds. For everything else to have to be right, to overcompensate at the level that he did is pretty remarkable, and part of the reason why I think the argument is even stronger for a guy like Bryce Young at the end of the day.
I love it. I love what you – again, Bryce, I know the family well. Mom and dad, quarterback dads, I've always said this for a lot of years, are the nuttiest species on the planet is the quarterback dad. And Craig Young, his dad, is not a part of that group. Like, Bryce is the way he is because of the parents and the way he was raised. And they were the best quarterback parents, mom and the dad were. So I love that you went on that limb. And, Bryce is unique, man. Bryce is special. I love that he kind of rallied a little bit, right, at the NFL level last year. And I'm a believer in how he does things. And I can't argue with you. I think for me, it was just watching Trevor Lawrence and just seeing the sheer size, right? A guy was just an Adonis. Looked like I can't even think of a good player comp for him coming out of high school. And again, I'm a big fan of makeup. And I saw Trevor Lawrence at the opening when he struggled. I think briefly there was some talk about Justin Fields bumping over Trevor Lawrence because of the opening performance. I just watched Trevor looking really unflappable and seeing guys and picking up his teammates and receivers dropping balls. And he never yelled and he never was flustered. And he was just that guy. And Bryce off the field, locker room, leadership. You saw it last year when he was benched, right? What did Bryce Young do the game after they won? He's there giving everybody a handshake. Again, that's just how Bryce is wired. The toughness of just getting the snot kicked out of him and getting up and smiling. The guy has never been hurt. And we talked about Steph Curry. I love the Steph Curry comment, Coop, because, he didn't play basketball in high school, but Bryce was an elite basketball player prior. And if you see him play football, he's kind of like no-look throws. He's kind of made those look, you see a lot of it with my guy, Matt Stafford, being a Rams guy, but Bryce did that back in high school. And it was because of the basketball background, being a point guard. I mentioned the hand size. Again, Bryce had bigger hands than DJU coming out of high school. People didn't really know about that too. So, I love the fact that we went with number one, Bryce. I think now, credit also, one of our former guys, Martin Simmons, for being ready to go on the table and say, Bryce Young was small. Let's stamp him anyway. I don't know if we'd be able to do that now just because of the projection. But still, Trevor Lawrence for me, why I went with him, and it was close. I just felt does a lot of the same things that Bryce did. And so he was more of the no-brainer, right? You talk about Bryce, everything had to break correctly for him. Trevor, you just thought, no matter where he went, no matter what system, he was going to do well. So Trevor Lawrence, but I love that you went with Bryce as well.
Oh, boy. It's going to make my decision challenging. I've heard both of your closing arguments, and I do appreciate that this is such a back-and-forth conversation when it comes to what there's like a half a foot difference between these two prospects, so it's really what you prefer. But there's a saying, guys, and it goes, it's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight and the dog. I'm picking Bryce Young to be the number one prospect in our ultimate bracket. Greg Biggins, thank you so much for being here and playing along, Coop. I appreciate your arguments, and we did it together as a family. We filled out this bracket, and now we'll let the internet do what the internet does and tell us that we were wrong. You can check out more of Greg's great work on 247sports.com. It's also the place to get all of your recruiting news and rankings, and that's where you will see the current number one player in the 2026 class and beyond.